Hello and welcome back to Arlene Knits and Sews. In today's tutorial we're going to learn how to make a vest sweater on our Sentro knitting machine. The sweater we're going to make is going to look a lot like this. This is the pattern we've made. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to crank out 4 panels. The front panels are going to be a little bit shorter than the back panels. And we're going to pick up the stitches here, and then we're going to knit the decrease in the neck, and then we're going to sew with the mattress stitch all 4 panels together. We'll then pick up our arms and neck with needles, and we will knit them out in a 1 by 1. We will turn them and make a little turn collar, and for the waist we're going to pick it up and with our needles and knit it out in a 1 by 1. And we will cast that off in an elasticated thread. I'll show you how to do that this time, and that's what our sweater is going to look like. To get going, you're going to need to grab yourself some waste yarn. So essentially what that is wool that you don't mind throwing away. Normally I've got a little stash of wool that's just scraps from previous projects, and I'll keep that for my waste yarn. You're then going to have your working yarn. For this project I've earmarked roughly about 300 grams of wool. It's probably like top end too much, but I always just go overboard when it comes to calculating how much wool you need. I never want to run out, and you just never know. But yeah, 300 is going to probably leave us with enough to spare. And you'll want to grab 4 pegs, or if you have proper weights which can pinch onto the wool, that's perfect, but I just use a peg. It does the job. 4 is fine. You are going to want to be seated at a nice smooth surface table, and the reason for that is because these little feet here have these tiny little plastic suction cups. And if you've got a nice smooth surface, it's going to grip, and your Sentro knitting machine isn't going to slide everywhere. You'll be able to crank with a lot more ease. You'll want to have a soft seat. So if you've got a hard chair, grab yourself a cushion because you want to be comfortable. I would recommend you have a washing basket handy. I like to keep my wool unraveled and in the washing basket. It just keeps it clean, it keeps it neat, and it stops it from knotting up and just becoming difficult to manage. And you'll need a pair of scissors. You'll also need a crochet hook for emergencies, and the Sentro knitting machine kit comes with this darning needle. This will just come in handy along the line too. So to begin with, we're going to start with the back panels because they're the easiest. It's just 2 rectangles, and we're going to cast on 34 stitches, and we're going to bear in mind that we're going to lose 3 of those 34. So ultimately it's going to condense up to about 60 stitches once we've sewn everything together, and I'm going to go ahead and show you how to cast on. The very first thing you want to do is make sure that you are in the panel setting. So that's the little P over here. This little switch goes up and down, and you want it to be on the P. So P is panel, it means it's flat, it means that you won't be able to crank past the white tooth over here. When it's in the tubular setting, you can go all the way around past that white tooth, but when you are in panel, it won't let you past. You can see here. Next, you want to take your crank and you want to crank it anti-clockwise until you get to that white tooth, until you get to the point where you can't crank anymore. Next, you're going to grab your waste yarn, pick up, grab, and you're going to feed it behind the white tooth, and you're going to crank clockwise, and you're going to weave the wool or the yarn so it goes under the first tooth, behind the second, under the third, behind the fourth, under, behind, under, behind, like this. And I have marked out a peg over here, and I know when I get to this peg I'm going to stop stopped doing this weaving, and I'm now going to turn around and go clockwise. Sorry, anti-clockwise. Okay, so we're arriving at the little marked peg that I've got over here, and I want to go underneath it, and I want it to go down first. Then I'm going to reverse and go the other way around, making sure that it catches not this tooth but the one behind it, like that. And then I'm going to feed it into the little catcher over here. I normally use the middle setting just because it's the most comfortable one to use. And we're going to go anti-clockwise all the way back again. Until you get to the white tooth, and then you're going to go clockwise. When you get to your little marcated peggy, you want to just keep cranking past it until it sinks down into the mechanism over here, like this. And then once you've seen that tooth fully sink down, you're going to go backwards again. And when you go backwards and forwards each time, you want to just give a little tug on your wool over here, not like a heavy tug, just a little tug, because that keeps the wool a bit taut, the tension a little bit tighter for your first and last stitches. In doing this, you have a little bit more control over those stitches, and you kind of have to be extremely precious about them because they can easily fall off. Like here you can see this one is trying to pop off. So I'm going to push them back down again. And another thing that they often do is they'll get all bunched up in each other. So I find just giving a little tug on the wool here can make quite a big difference. Okay, here you can see that we had the wool under these stitches here. 1, 2, we've lost 2 stitches. And the very last one, the one that we've marked, it's lost that stitch as well. So although it says 34 over there, oh, can you see that? No, you cannot. It says 34 over there. You have actually lost 3 stitches. So essentially this whole piece here is only 31 stitches, which is half of the back panel. Another thing I just want to point out is that you want to make sure you only ever have 1 stitch on your first and last stitches of the panel piece. There should only ever be 1 stitch caught here. So keep an eye on that. If you see it starting to bunch up or collect stitches, you can just come in with your darning needle and you can pick them off and just monitor. When you've cranked out sufficient amounts of your waste yarn and you're happy to add your working yarn, you can just tie them together like this. And while you're feeding it through, just make sure it doesn't get caught up in this thing here. So as it comes through, just pop it out, crank until it's past this point, and then pop it back in again. Okay, so at this point, I've now moved over to my working yarn. And I'm going to crank out 10 rows. And once we've got 10 rows on our machine, we're going to anchor them down with the pegs. I use an app called Row Counter for this. I'll show you what it looks like now. Okay, so I'll just help you find the Row Counter app quickly. It's called Row Counter. And it's this one right at the top here. So it's a little box that says 26 and I already have it, so I'm going to open it, but you can just download it. Okay, we've just reached 10 rows, so I'm going to grab my pegs And the reason we do this is because you can kind of see here it curls, and it could potentially curl up and off the teeth, and you really don't want that. So we're just trying to stop it from doing that. So this kind of gives it a bit of weight. I just put one on either end and then somewhere in the middle. When doing this, try not to get the pegs on the actual working yarn, and make sure it stays on the waste yarn so it doesn't pull and distort or mutate those stitches in any way. I'm now going to keep cranking, and I'm going to go all the way to 100 rows. Okay, so once you've cranked out 100 rows, which we've done here, we're going to take our wool out of the feeder, like that, and we're going to pull it out of this little holder, and we're just going to let it hang gently. You can throw the ball in the middle if you like, you can do that. And then we're going to crank once. Like that. Then at this point, we're going to grab a pair of circular needles. Sorry, you do actually need those, I didn't mention that. And with our darning needle, we're going to gently take all of these stitches off the hooks, and pop it onto the needles like this. See, here's an example of where you might need your emergency crochet hook. So I just dropped that stitch. So I'm going to pick it up quickly, pop it back on the needle. Okay, and now we have all of our stitches on the needles, and we're just going to cast this off quickly. And once you fully cast it off, you can just give it a little shake, loosen out all of those stitches, and then that's how long it's going to be. And once you've done that, you can make a second one. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to join these two pieces together with a mattress stitch. For this next part, you're going to use your darning needle. You're going to have a pre-cut piece of yarn wool in the same color as your work, and you got your two panels lying flat in front of you. You can thread your darning needle, and then we're going to find the first corner, and we're going to, which I can see is here. If I look at these first row of stitches here, they're not perfect, and I don't want to use that row, so I'm going to use this row instead. And we're going to be working in all these little lines here. You can see these little horizontal lines. So the stitch itself kind of looks like a horseshoe, and we're going behind that stitch into these bits. And we're going to first come up in that hole there. We're going to do the exact same thing with our other panel. So I'm going to discard that first row, it looks a little funny. And I'm going to go into the nearest row that looks perfect, which is that one there. We're going in underneath, pull it through, but be careful not to pull your whole stitch or your whole piece of wool through. Then we're going to come back to the first panel, this one, and we're going to look for that little horizontal line I was telling you about. We're going to go through it like this. You can leave these stitches quite loose for the time being. Now we're going to zig back to this panel, and we're going to find that one there, and go in, sew it through, go back to the first panel, go through there, sorry it's gotten a bit looped, just pull it out there, back to the second panel, up through that line, back again to the first one, and up through that line, and the second one, okay, so at this point now you can hold on to the loose end of wool at the one end where you started right at the beginning, over here and on the end that you're working with, and you can literally just pull them, and you can see that that has bonded these two pieces together flawlessly. You can't tell the difference between that panel and that panel now, and you're going to keep doing that all the way till you get to the top, going like little I'd say like 2 to 3 inches at a time, and then pulling those ends nice and tight, but keeping those few inches a little bit loose. You don't want to tighten them the entire time. And we're just going to go all the way up now. Okay, so to make the front panel, it's a very similar technique to making the back panels, except for the fact that we're going to cast on the exact same amount of stitches, which was 34 stitches, and instead of knitting up to 100 rows, cranking, we're going to crank up to 70 rows, and then we're going to pick it up onto our knitting needles, and we're going to start a decreasing method, and it's going to look like this, but the two are going to be inverted. So for example, this one I started decreasing on the wrong side, which we're going to call panel B. For the one that we're going to make now, I'll start decreasing on the right side. So yeah, I started decreasing on the wrong side, which is this pearly part, and for the next one I'm going to start decreasing on the right side. And what I did is, for what we knitted up to 70 stitches cranked, and then for the first 10 decreases we decreased in 2 stitches. So in layman's terms, and I'll put this down in the description, I knitted the row, and then I came back and I decreased 2 stitches, knitted, came back, decreased 2, knitted, came back, until I had lost 10 stitches on my needles. And after that I did the same thing, but only 1 stitch at a time, not 2, until I had 18 stitches left over here. So to recap, we cast our waste yarn onto the allocated 34 stitches, and once we've knitted out, cranked out enough, we're going to cut that off and we're going to add our working yarn, and we're now going to crank for 70 rows. So there we have our 70 rows. I'm now going to pick all of these stitches up onto my circular needles. I can just cast them off by taking this out of the feeder, cranking it round 1 time, and then the second time you can just pick up all of those stitches. So we have all of our stitches on our circular needles, and this is going to be panel A because the first stitch that I'm going to make is going to be on the right side. With this one, the first row I did was on the wrong side, so I started the decrease on the wrong side, but this one I'm going to start on the right side. So for row 71 we're going to decrease 2, and then we're going to knit back for row 72. We're going to be knitting in purl, by the way, because this is now a stockinette stitch. So this one we're going to be knitting in knit, decrease 2, going back in purl, and then when we go back to the knit side we decrease 2 again, and we do that until we've decreased 10 stitches. So we're at row 81 and I've decreased 10 stitches, you can see here now, and from this point onwards on the knit side I'm going to decrease only 1 stitch. Remember, you just carry on the purl side for this panel, and I'm going to do that until I've got 18 stitches left on my needles. We're now at 18 stitches, and I'm just going to knit continuously normally without decreasing until I've reached 100 rows. When you've knitted to 100 and you've cast off, we're now going to darn sew these 2 ends together, and we're going to start at the neck part. That's very important, because if you weren't concentrating and you accidentally added on 1 or 2 more lines, it's very important that they match up here perfectly. This we can pull out and we can sort out at the end. It's going to be the exact same stitch method that we used for the back panels, the mattress stitch. So you go in from the first end underneath, and then go over to the second one, find the first perfect row, come in from underneath, and then we're going for these, we're going for these little lines over here. Okay, so we've bound, darned, sewn this front panel together, and the next step will be to connect the 2 shoulder areas. So we're going to take our back panel, and we're going to start with the part here, not this part, and we're going to have the right side facing upward. I'm going to put that down on the table, and we're going to take the front part and we're going to have the right side facing downward, so the 2 right sides are facing each other. and we're going to place that down like this. And we're going to start at the very corner here and the very corner here, and you can just crochet or darn, whatever you feel more comfortable with, these two ends together, stitch by stitch perfectly, and then again on the other side. Next up, you're going to fit it, and you're going to work out where you want the armpit to comfortably fit. For this, you can probably just use one peg, and you can just do it in the front. So say, for example, I feel like that would be a comfortable place. So I'm just going to pop my peg here, and what I'm going to do, take this off, and then I'm going to count how many stitches that is, and I'm going to work out exactly where it is on this side, join them together, and then match it up this side, and then we'll join the two sides together all the way down, not past the waist yarn, just to the waist yarn. Alright, so we're here now and things are starting to take shape quite nicely. And next up, we're going to grab ourselves a much thinner pair of needles, and we're going to pick up all the stitches around the neck, and we're going to knit them in a 1x1 knit stitch for probably about 10 centimeters. Okay, so we've knitted out the collar and we've turned it. I ended up not knitting it 10 centimeters. I think it was closer to like 7. So this here should be about 3.5, maybe 3 centimeters. And here we are. And next up, we're going to pick up all the stitches around the armpit area, and we're going to do the exact same thing like we did here. By the way, if you're not sure how to pick up stitches and turn a collar, I have a video a bit further down in my videos called How to Knit a Sweater with Big Sleeves, where I go over this in like excruciating details. So if you want to learn how to do that, if that's a technique you haven't yet mastered, you can pop over. It's the white one, and it'll show you how to do all of that. By the way, I realized that I've got a slightly different technique that I've used for turning these things here. I've also got a slightly different technique that I use to pick up these stitches. For the way that I picked up these stitches, it's the exact same way that I did it in the how to make a beanie tutorial. So if you go down there, but essentially what I did was, I don't have a crochet hook, but I took a crochet hook and I just sort of took loose wool and I fed it through the stitches, loose stitches, and then I put it back onto the hook. Yeah, so, but that is in the how to make a beanie tutorial. With these things, the sleeves and the collar, I did the 1x1 rib knit, which I also have a tutorial on if you go down into my playlist, and I used smaller needles so that it would be more compact, and when it came time to casting off, I used the original bigger needle. So that is actually something that's going to make a difference because it's going to make this area a lot less tight. So yeah, we cast it off with bigger needles, and then we sewed it down in the same way that we sewed down in the white sweater tutorial, except that in that one we were sewing a garter stitch down. In this one we're sewing the 1x1 rib. So there is a difference in that when I'm sewing it down, I'm going from what I call a lump or an outie to an innie, which is the in-between ridge. I'll show you what I mean in a sec. Okay, so we just got done casting off, and another thing is that I cast off with the long tail method, meaning that I've left quite a lot of wool at the end because we are now going to use this wool to turn the sleeve. And you can see what I mean by casting off with a larger pair of needles. It's sort of like it takes these stitches, which are actually, they were a lot, but because we knitted them in the 1x1, it sort of compacted it in and it shrunk it down, and we also used smaller needles to knit this. So casting off with a bigger needle just sort of opened this back up again. and when we turn it, it just makes it look a little neater, and it's easier to get your arm in there or your neck or whatever you are making. So now I'm going to explain to you what I mean by innies and outies. So when you are turning, the very first thing you want to make sure you're doing is that you're ending at the exact same stitch that you started normally. But because I'm turning this, it wasn't very important because you're not going to see it because it's going to be sewn down here. But ordinarily you would keep a row counter in here. I just use a key ring chain or something like that. Okay, so what we're doing is we're following this now, what I call an outie. So an outie is the knit stitch, and the innie is the pull stitches here. So I've got this outie stitch and I'm going to follow it down, and because it's turning, on the other side it's actually an innie stitch, so we're going to sew it down to an outie stitch, which is this one here. So we're just going there, and we turn, and the next stitch is an outie, so we go through the outie and we look for the innie over here, and we sew that down. Meaning the next one's going to be an innie, and we're going to look for the outie on the other side over here. And the reason we're doing that is because once you've folded it over, it is the inversion of the stitch it is on this side, on that side. So that is important. And we're just going to go around now, and we're going to do that the whole way around. Okay, our sweater or our sweater vest now looks like this. So I'm wearing another sweater under this, and it's chilly outside. And it's now time to pick up these waist stitches and knit them down. So to do this part, we're going to do a technique called frogging, which is where you take your needle and you stick it into the stitches in a particular point. So we're doing it right at this junction, at this joinery between the waist yarn and the working yarn. And how you do that is, so like I explained earlier, a stitch is kind of horseshoe shaped, and you don't want to grab the entire horseshoe, you really just want one end. So whichever side you started, it should be on the left. So you can see here, this is the horseshoe. I'm going to go into the left of that horseshoe, so you can count that as 1, 2 you don't go for, 1 you go for, 2 you don't go for, 1 not 2, 1 not 2, 1 not 2, 1 not 2, and you're going to go around like this, and you're going to pick up all of the stitches. If you counted out your rows perfectly and you joined everything and everything lined up perfectly, you're going to have a nice time. If you're like me and you have ADHD, you're going to have a situation like this. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to continue frogging, but I'm just going to frog into the actual working yarn, and I'm going to pull out these excess stitches. By the way, once I had frogged up all the stitches onto the needles, I literally just cut the waist yarn off. I didn't even bother trying to untangle it because I'm impatient. So that's just what I did. You do you. Once you have knitted out the hem as long as you want it to be, and you're ready to cast off with the elasticated thread, you're going to grab something that looks like this. And it's quite stretchy, and what you do is you get to the point where you're ready to cast off, so that's the exact place where you started, and you'll cut your wool and you'll tie on the elasticated thread at that exact point, and then you'll grab a thicker pair of needles So I just went with the ones that I used for the jersey, and you'll use those needles when you're casting off and not the thinner ones that you're using now. You can see it does. I'll try and show you without losing my stitches. It looks like this. So it's still noticeable, but it's very, very subtle, and it gives that casted off area this extremely elasticated look or feel. So yeah, that's what we're going to do now. Cool, and that is the final result. So there we have our elasticated waist in the 1x1 rib knit. You can see it's really subtle, it's not obvious at all. And the panels have joined together really nicely. It kind of looks like one, even though it's two, actually 4 panels. And the arms and the neck look really cool. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one.